Welcome to Yorba Linda, California. Today we're diving headfirst into the life, legacy, triumphs, and let's be honest, spectacular flameout of America's 37th president at the Richard M. Nixon Presidential Library and Birthplace.
Okay, today we have a really cool one for you. Of the 16 presidential libraries that are run by the National Archives, this is definitely one of them. And it's also considered among the top 2 presidential libraries in the state of California. Here we are at the Richard M. Nixon Library and Birthplace.
So sit back, relax, and let's explore how a president who left office over 50 years ago still manages to be oddly relevant today. The story at the Nixon Library begins in the 1960s, when the United States was going through what can only be described as a pre-bicentennial personality crisis. We were still processing the assassination of a well-beloved president and the assassination of one of the nation's leading civil rights leaders, and a laundry list of social upheavals trying to correct some of the history's greatest injustices. Meanwhile, we were bogged down deeply in an unpopular war, and the sitting president's approval rating was so bad, he decided not to run for re-election.
The winner of the Democratic primaries, Robert F. Kennedy, was shot right before the convention. And so at the convention, they had to find a candidate, and cleverly, the Democrats decided to take the vice president, who had not been in the spotlight during the entire vice presidency, and run him against Richard Nixon. That result predictably turned out to be not for the unknown vice president.
If this all sounds incredibly familiar, the Democratic Party has repeated this strategy multiple times, with identical results. From this hall, we step into a replica of the Oval Office as it looked during Nixon's tenure. It's iconic, it's historic, and it's also decorated with a bizarre amount of bird statues where books should be. We even got to sit behind the faux Wilson desk and imagine ourselves as president. Spoiler alert, it did not go well. We're now convinced the lack of corners in the room makes it impossible to make good decisions in this space.
Is there something weird about this room? I don't feel any corners anymore.
Naturally, the museum covers the Vietnam War, a conflict Nixon inherited and campaigned to end. After multiple failed strategies to win, peace was finally negotiated in his second term, leading to the release of many American POWs, who were unfortunately greeted by a nation that wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet. Then we get to the good stuff, his diplomatic breakthroughs. Nixon started thawing Cold War tensions with Russia. He opened relations with China in 1972. Yes, Nixon is one of the reasons you have an iPhone, cheap electronics, and drones today. And speaking of history-making moments, Nixon was president when Americans first walked on the moon. He even called the astronauts while they were on the surface, no doubt setting the precedent for AT&T's outrageous roaming charges. Oh, and fun fact, Nixon also brought rock and roll to the White House by inviting Elvis Presley. However, when it came to Supreme Court appointments, none of his 4 justices had a notable following in rock music, or any other kind of music for that matter. In an early sign of what was to come, his vice president Spiro Agnew was charged with corruption and tax charges, leading to a plea bargain where he pled no contest to minor tax charges and had to resign. This allowed Nixon to appoint Gerald Ford, a little-known and even less nationally elected congressman from Michigan, as vice president. If Nixon's presidency was a roller coaster, Watergate was the part where the car derails and lands in a lake. In June 1972, a group of Nixon operatives broke into the Democratic Party headquarters at the Watergate complex. Their mission? Dig up dirt on George McGovern, who, ironically, was already losing badly in the polls. Naturally, they got caught. He won by a landslide anyway. The break-in was completely unnecessary, truly a historically brain-dead move. A lengthy and very public investigation ensued, revealing that Nixon and his top staff were behind the whole thing. Facing the threat of impeachment, Nixon resigned. The new president, Gerald Ford, then stepped in and promptly pardoned him. Now we rewind to Nixon's humble beginnings. Born in 1913 in a tiny 900-square-foot house assembled by his father on what is now the library grounds. Served in World War II, climbed the political ranks from congressman to senator to vice president under Eisenhower. Lost the 1960 election to John F. Kennedy, and was probably the first election influenced by television. Then we hit the pop culture room, which features Nixon's impact on media, memes, and bizarrely, a shower nozzle marketed as the Dickhead. We have questions. Outside, we strolled through the Rose Garden, which isn't much to look at in the winter, then visited the graves of Pat and Richard Nixon. Next up, Nixon's tiny childhood home, lovingly restored to what it looked like when he lived there for the first 9 years of his life. If you have even a hint of claustrophobia, maybe take a deep breath before going in. Finally, we checked out Marine One, Nixon's presidential helicopter.
But it's not a replica.
Did he get to keep it after the pardon?
I don't know.
Fun fact, when Nixon visited Egypt, President Anwar Sadat complimented the helicopter, and Nixon, probably in a rare moment of generosity, just gave him his backup chopper. This move led Egypt placing major arms orders with the US. Shortly after, arms sales in the Middle East exploded, leading to, you guessed it, the 1970s oil crisis. Of course, no one can leave a museum without passing through a gift shop. We're genuinely curious, does anyone buy Nixon memorabilia unironically?
I want some Watergate wine glasses.
Ultimately, a museum can't fully capture the complexity of a US president, but it can pique your curiosity about their impact. Nixon's legacy is a blend of brilliant diplomacy, massive domestic achievements, and self-inflicted political disasters. As Ice-T once said, don't hate the playa, hate the game. If you ever find yourself in Yorba Linda, visiting the Nixon Library is definitely more interesting than sitting in traffic on the 91 freeway. Got any fun Nixon facts? Drop them in the comments. And if you want to support the channel, like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.